We are living in a moment in history where it seems there is an obsession with being happy, as if there are easy shortcuts. Enjoy this, and you will quickly achieve happiness. But happiness is not that. Happiness depends on the meaning each of us gives to our life. But what happens? In a society that has lost its meaning, in a society that has often lost its way, we have replaced the meaning of life with sensations. These sensations can be massages, food, alcohol, social media. Not everything has to be bad, but it is self-destructive when it replaces the true meaning of life. There is increasing research on this sense of life. The Japanese call it ikigai, and nowadays it is known that when there is that ikigai, that sense that one gives to things, one can have better physical and psychological health, even improving cardiovascular markers, but it also improves happiness. Each of us, all of those who are listening, you and I, Melania, are fighting a battle in some aspect of our lives. All of us are constantly suffering from something, a financial issue, a health concern, a family matter, a professional issue. There is always something that worries us, and these battles define us. And how we deal with these battles will define what we call happiness, because happiness consists of connecting with the good things that happen every day and managing the bad things that happen every day, those battles, as best as we can. It has a nuance of fulfillment. Fulfillment is a state where I feel my needs are met and I want nothing more. Therefore, one can be suffering a lot but be happy at that moment because they know how to connect with the small and good things that happen to them every day. In other words, happiness lies in connecting with the small things that arise in everyday life. The best antidote to suffering and pain is love. It is feeling loved, feeling that you are not alone. That sense of unwanted loneliness, involuntary loneliness, is a terrible sensation for the psyche, the mind, and the heart. That's why, many times, when someone is alone, having someone, a vitamin person, someone who supports you, someone who listens to you, doesn't judge you, understands you, and when you tell them something, it instantly makes you feel better. It doesn't matter if you haven't seen them for a year, you know that with that person, things are much simpler. That simplicity in human relationships that we all long for. Whom do we love? Well, love for oneself. That's self-esteem. Loving oneself in a healthy way. Not loving oneself excessively, which leads to narcissism, nor loving oneself too little, which brings in the destructive insecurities for the human mind. And that has a lot to do with the inner voice. All of us have an inner voice that determines how our self-esteem will be and how we will treat ourselves. The second is love for a partner. Love for a partner makes us brave. As Plato said, there is no one so cowardly that love cannot transform into someone brave. I believe that I am sure we all know someone who has suddenly fallen in love and transforms, and nothing scares them, and they take risks they would never have taken before. Partner love is amazing. When you have that partner's love, when you feel loved, that sense of confidence. It even improves, we know nowadays, the immune system. You have better physical and psychological health. The third is love for others, cooperation, solidarity, love for your parents, your friends, your siblings, even the people you work with. When you are in harmony with the people around you, you can mitigate the effects that stress can have on you. If you live anxious or worried about something, a financial issue, but you feel loved, the stress it causes you is much less. Then we have love for beliefs and ideals. Ideas are held, beliefs are lived, said Ortega y Gasset. When you believe in something and love your beliefs, you have strength, you have fortitude, and you overcome almost everything. And finally, love for memories. I think, perhaps, of all the loves, it is the one that seems most different, and that's why I always love to talk about it. A few years ago, Susumu Nagawa, Nobel Prize in Medicine, discovered that when a person remembers something intensely, the memory of that pleasant image activates the same mechanisms in the brain as when this happened in reality. This is magical. When one is distressed, there are many relaxation techniques for this. When you work with MDR or techniques that help improve states of distress, bringing to mind pleasant images, memories of people where there was love, where you felt loved, where you felt grateful, suddenly produces biochemical effects in the organism itself. Therefore, that love, when it inundates our mind, our body, also helps us become better with others, to become people who do not judge, who empathize, who are affectionate, who seek common interests. I often tell people to look for common interests with others, to ask others how they feel, and when you have asked them how they feel, remember those details because I learned this from my father. My father remembers everything, and in his phone's contacts, he has everyone's numbers, but next to them, he writes things like, his father has arthritis. His wife has Alzheimer's. His son had a school failure. And so, when he calls someone, he always looks for that common ground. Nowadays, we are so rushed with our worries and thoughts that it is hard for us to pay attention to the concerns of others. Therefore, love, indeed, Melania. I believe we all know it, but love is one of the best remedies for difficult times. Well, I believe, Melania, that this is one of the most fascinating topics and probably one of my favorite subjects to discuss. When I studied medicine, I come from a family of psychiatrists. My grandfather was a psychiatrist, my father is a psychiatrist, I have an aunt who is a psychiatrist, a cousin who is a psychiatrist, and I have a lot. My sister is a psychologist. In other words, I live surrounded by people who work and study the world of the mind and behavior. But while I was studying my notes in my medical career, I found that there was always a missing emotional component in illnesses. I think we are all aware that when you're nervous, you might have palpitations. You have an exam, and suddenly your stomach feels a bit unsettled, or your eyelid starts to twitch. In other words, there are physical symptoms related to emotions, but where was the core? Where did the mind and the body come together? I started reading, researching, treating many patients, and I came to an easy-to-explain conclusion, one that anyone, anywhere in the world, can understand and apply to their own life. Imagine, Melania, that you and I are here, and suddenly the alarms start ringing, and someone shouts, "Fire!" Automatically, you and I get up, become nervous, and our hearts start racing. Why? Because that alert signal, that threat, has activated a place in our brain, the hypothalamus, which sends a signal to the adrenal glands, and two hormones are activated, adrenaline, known to everyone, and cortisol. And automatically, what happens? My brain seeks survival mechanisms, which are fight or flight. We start with tachycardia, the heart beats faster to deliver blood to the tissues so we can fight or run, which is what's needed. Then comes tachypnea, the need to take in more oxygen into the body so that my muscles and cells have more oxygen and can fight. Glucose is mobilized, fats begin to mobilize, and at this point, I can no longer reason because I am in a state of alert, and the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for reflection, thinking, seeking solutions to problems, suddenly doesn't allow me to think as clearly. It's like I lose my way, lose track of what I was telling you. The hippocampus, which is the area of memories and where we store data, is hypersensitive to cortisol, so our memory fails us, and we have gaps in what we want to say. That cortisol spike will take several hours to return to its original state. Why is this so important, Mel? Because that elevated cortisol state will change our organism. Cortisol is a cyclical hormone. At night, it's low, and it needs to be low for me to sleep, and throughout the night, it rises until around 8 in the morning, when it reaches its highest peak. At 8 in the morning, it starts to drop again to deal with the challenges of the day. But what happens if I'm constantly worried about something? Here comes one of the most important ideas I'm going to convey today, that my mind and my body do not distinguish between a real threat and an imaginary one. Faced with something physically real that happens to me, like an alarm, being mugged on the street, receiving a call that my child is sick, being told that my father is hospitalized. The brain activation for something real happens very similarly if I'm sitting at work, at home, and I start to think, what if my child is into drugs? What if I don't make ends meet? What if I get mugged on the street? 90% of the things we worry about never happen. In fact, it's 91.4%, but my mind and my body experience it as if it were real. In other words, both what happens to me and what worries me have a direct impact on my mind. And this is key because if more than 90% of the things we worry about never happen, it will mean that I am inducing a sustained state of alert in my organism, what I simply call a cortisol intoxication. I start to induce my organism into what we call the sympathetic nervous system, which is that state of alert where cortisol is secreted, and that cortisol intoxication will generate changes at 3 levels in my organism. On a physical level, your hair falls out. Why does your hair fall out? Because when you're in a state of alert, in a state of threat, it's as if you're in the trenches, and your body is trying to allocate its resources in the best way possible. So, if you're at war, if you're in a battle, if you're being chased down the street, your hair is not a primary organ to face that challenge, and suddenly you start losing hair. Cortisol inhibits the proper recovery of hair follicles or skin fibroblasts, and as a result, those dreaded wrinkles, blemishes, and changes in skin color appear. On the other hand, you start feeling a constant sensation of chest tightness, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, gastrointestinal problems, which I will explain in more detail shortly. Your muscles are tense because you're always on the verge of running or fighting. So, if you make a slightly unusual movement, you might experience muscle tension, or you might feel like you can't move or that your whole body hurts. It feels heavy, and it's hard to move. You feel more rigid. This is on a physical level. But cortisol also alters the functioning of estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone. When you understand how this hormone works, you'll know that when you're intoxicated with cortisol, many things happen in your body, but one is crucial, melania, and I want to explain it to you. The state of sustained stress will modify the immune system. And for me, this is key. In a moment of acute stress, cortisol acts as an anti-inflammatory, but when the body constantly experiences chronic stress, what happens is that the immune system, inflammation, cortisol, and the body become disassociated, and we start to inflame, gastritis, gastroenteritis, tonsillitis, irritable bowel syndrome, dermatitis. In other words, latent, slight inflammation sets in, which is very dangerous because when you enter a state of inflammation in the body, it can lead to many physical and psychological problems. Let's move on to the intestinal system, which I believe everyone can relate to. Nowadays, we know it's the second brain. Why? Because it's surrounded by a powerful neural network and has a direct impact. What I think, what I feel has an impact on the body. Who hasn't had an exam, a romantic date, or a work appointment and knows that their gut sends them a signal that something is happening that day? Next to the intestines are the arteries and veins through which the nutrients from the food I eat travel to nourish my entire body, and inside the intestines, within the lumen, are intestinal villi where nutrients are absorbed and the famous microbiota, which is crucial. Today, it's one of the major topics we're studying in depth. I'm a big enthusiast of the microbiota. It's the collection of bacteria, both good and bad microorganisms, that help maintain a healthy balance for nutrient absorption and substance integration within the body. Today, it's crucial, but we know that sustained stress states, due to that famous cortisol or what we eat, will alter the microbiota. What's the problem with this? That through those wounds, things in quotes, enter the bloodstream that shouldn't enter. In other words, intestinal permeability is damaged, and toxic substances enter the bloodstream. Today, we know they are the cause of some neurological or neurodegenerative diseases. On the other hand, you're fermenting, your microbiota is altered, and that generates gas, causing abdominal bloating and those annoying gases. So, sometimes when people ask me, how do I know if I'm inflamed? I tell them, look at your gums because it's a big. If you brush your teeth and notice bleeding. Or, see if, for example, you have a swollen belly or how you react to what you eat, and you'll realize if you have that state of inflammation there. On a psychological level, the first thing that happens is that you become irritable, you snap at the slightest thing, you're in a state of alert, and you're much more vulnerable and susceptible. The second thing that happens is that you don't sleep well, you get to the night, and because you have that heightened state of alertness, what happens is that you get into bed and start tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Sometimes, out of exhaustion, you manage to fall into bed, but you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning with a sense of worry, something that troubles you and prevents you from sleeping. On other occasions, you may sleep through the night, but you wake up feeling exhausted because that state of alertness prevents you from reaching deep sleep, so even if you've slept the necessary hours, your body doesn't feel fully rested. And then, on many occasions, you can become sad. And this is another extremely important idea, Mel, that I want to convey to you today. Many depressions stem from prolonged states of alertness. And here I'll emphasize it, when you have a moment of very high tension, a lot of work, where you've been very concerned about something, a challenge, when you have something on your mind. Physiologically, when that ends, your body will be affected, and your mind will be a bit sad, a bit apathetic. I remember that when my husband passed his civil service exams, his coach told me, what surprises me the most about those preparing for civil service exams is that whether they pass or fail, in the following months, they are sad, they seem kind of down. Why is that? Because physiologically, when the brain has been struggling against something for a long time, and that ends, suddenly it's sad, it's subdued, it's apathetic. In other words, when one understands all of this, understanding is relieving, and when one understands what their mind is going through, they feel relieved because otherwise, what happens is that one becomes a slave to physical and psychological symptoms, and you feel lost in life. Being able to connect the mind and the body and understand that we are often what we think, that this thought leads to an emotion, and that emotion has an impact on the body will help immensely in dismantling that cortisol intoxication and those periods of sustained stress.